Europe is striking back at the United States by choosing not to strike at all. Actually, what's more, Europe is limiting the United States' ability to strike Iran. And what was just a few weeks ago your standard cross-Atlantic bickering has turned into something much more substantial. I guess it has been about 2 months since the last Trump-Europe crisis, so here we go again. This time, the problem is less green and more red, white, and green. The United States wants European help with its special Mullah operation. Europe first declined to get involved in the fight, then declined to provide tangible support to reopen the Strait of Hormuz, and now is denying the United States airspace and base use. Perhaps call it less of a heated rivalry and more of a story of heated rhetoric. Either way, the media's discussion of the situation is missing out on the broader strategic incentives that both sides of the Atlantic are staring down. So, today, I want to discuss 3 main points. First, we will cover the entrapment problem that Europe's initial moves were intending to address. Namely, Europe wants to discourage long-run bad behavior by the United States, even if it means short-run pain for the continent. Then we will move the conversation to the present, describe why the basing issue is a completely different story, and put that in the context of how NATO works, both formally and informally. Finally, I want to examine the idea that helping the United States reopen the strait will only prolong the problem. And rejoice, for that means discussing the underlying causes of war. But let's start with the entrapment issue. And I will keep this part brief because it plays on themes that we have covered before. In short, entrapment occurs when a state initiates a war, which then induces its alliance partner to join the fight, even though the alliance partner would have preferred no war at all. Basically, you have a preference ordering from the initiator as war together as the best outcome, then war alone, and no war as the worst outcome. Or, more perversely, war together, no war, war alone. Meanwhile, the alliance partner wants no war, then war together, and then war featuring the initiator by itself, perhaps because the partner does not want to see the initiator suffer long-term harm. Well, if the initiator has the ability to dictate whether a war starts at all, it can see that its partner will come to the rescue when push comes to shove. That means that it can obtain its best possible outcome by initiating the war. And, true to its name, the initiator initiates a war. Entrapment has been a part of the Iran war discussion from day one, as there is the possibility that Israel was the initiator in this case, with the United States acting as the partner. Israel started the conflict because it could induce the United States to join, and, indeed, the United States joined. Turning to NATO politics, the United States has moved into the role of the initiator, with Europe now being the partner. Even if Europe does not want to help bomb Iran, the United States pushed on the transatlantic relationship to get help opening the Strait of Hormuz. It is a process that you have likely become intimately familiar with over the last year plus, because it keeps happening. We have simply moved to a new venue. Well, Europe resisted. One explanation was that Europe did not want to create a long-term perverse incentive. In the short run, it may indeed be better for Europe to get the strait reopened. But Europe does not want to be in a position where, 6 months from now, Trump gets involved in a new conflict, and Europe once again has a short-run incentive to help out. Not when reopening the strait would be militarily costly and inevitably lead to combat fatalities. So Europe puts its foot down today, hoping that it will deter Trump's next adventure. Predictably, this position irked Trump, leading to the standard sort of social media and headline quotes from the press about Europe's alleged weak will. However, that is more or less par for the course. Fast forward a month into the war, and things just jumped above the mean. The latest break from the last few days has shifted the focus from active European effort to passive European effort. Italy denied the United States landing privileges at one of its bases for flights that were currently en route and ultimately bound for the Gulf. We ought to be careful not to describe this as an Italian ban, as it appears that the United States was sloppy and did not ask for advance permission, as their agreement calls for. However, Spain and France have explicit policies here to not permit US military aircraft involved in the operation to use their airspace or bases. That triggered Trump, giving us the current transatlantic spat. What makes this situation different is how granting airspace and basing privileges do not impose tangible costs to Spain and France. This is no longer about being unwilling to incur the risks that the United States is trying to force upon Europe. It is now about trying to specifically alter the US mission in Iran. Let's be clear about what the previous agreements do and do not say on the matter, before pivoting to the broader strategic picture here. US bases in those countries are a part of the broader NATO mission to keep the United States integrated with European security affairs, and serve as a tripwire force. However, the North Atlantic Treaty only obligates allies to assist each other in the event of an attack in the North Atlantic area. It is defensive in nature to avoid the aforementioned entrapment issues. It is limited in geographic scope, also to support that defensive mission, and avoid directly promoting adventurous foreign policies. Well, there has been no attack in the North Atlantic area, and thus there is no obligated treaty support. As always, NATO allies are free to assist bilaterally on issues as they see fit, which is how a coalition of the willing ended up in Iraq. But that is their choice. Although the Trump administration has been frustrated with Europe's lack of voluntary assistance, what caused this to reach a fever pitch was refusal to provide passive assistance as well. Relative moderates like Marco Rubio discussed basing rights as a type of a grand bargain. The United States invests in those bases to develop tripwire forces, but part of the compensation for that is to use those bases to project power all across the region and the rest of the world. Thus, this relationship is, quote, a hard one to stay engaged in and say this is good for the United States. So all of that is going to have to be re-examined. Another thing worth noting here is that congressional Democrats, who have pounced on just about every step of the Iran war so far, very successfully for their political odds, may I add, have been relatively muted about this ongoing dispute. As for Europe's reasoning, it is a combination of the price shocks and Ukraine concerns. High petrol prices are bad, no need to discuss that further. Well, scratch that. High petrol prices are good if you are exporting a bunch of crude, like Russia does. Enjoy your swimming pool of rubles as you pay for your next phase of the war. Iran, mainly through its proxies, has been a direct nuisance to Europe for decades. But Ukraine is the primary thing on the minds of European officials at the moment. Sure, Ukraine is bombing all of the Russian export terminals to oblivion right now, but it would still be better if crude prices were lower on whatever oil does sneak out. From this perspective, the faster that the Strait of Hormuz reopens, the better. And so Europe is now applying coercive pressure to get the United States to end the war. Now, if we put up the big board, it is not hard to see that the Ukraine situation would be better if the Iranian government were no longer in power. After all, it is an indirect nuisance on the bigger issue. With no more supreme leader, there is no collaboration with Russia, and ultimately there is no second-hand damage to Ukraine. In that light, for the pressure on the United States to improve the situation, you really have to bank on it resulting in a rapid agreement to end the conflict. If it does not, then all you end up doing is increasing the odds of the Iranian government surviving. Unfortunately, that takes us to our favorite board of logical gaps. Phase 1 is that Europe cuts aid. Phase 3 is that a settlement is reached. Whenever I put up a similar version of the slide, the point is not to say that Phase 1 cannot imply Phase 3. It often can, under certain conditions. The problem is that if you do not specify those conditions, and then work through the logic of the corresponding argument, you do not really have a strategy. You have hopes and prayers, which are not currency in the kingdom of logic. After all, if we focus on the third phase, agreement on a particular settlement, We all know by now what determines war versus peace is the presence of a bargaining friction. Indeed, the first-order effect of offering assistance, or more precisely denying logistical support, is to make the United States less likely to win. This, by itself, does not get us any closer to the end of the war. All it will do is reduce the demands that the United States puts on the table, and increase the demands that Iran puts on the table by the exact same amount. There is no progress. Now, hypothetically, if a deal did come to fruition, it is not necessarily bad for Europe that Iran reached an agreement under improved bargaining power. War is costly for Europe as well, and so it may prefer getting a deal done to avoid those costs. Ukraine's position may still end up better despite the connection between Russia and Iran, but we still need to specify how exactly making Iran more powerful results in a settlement that was not feasible before. I can see ways that the logical connection could work. For example, if Iran were uncertain about its war prospects if Europe assisted in the conflict, but had accurate information if the war remained regional, then congratulations, you just eliminated the information problem. With the bargaining friction gone, a settlement will be reached shortly. But I can also see how this could backfire. Suppose that the United States is fighting because it still has hope that an enfeebled regime will fall to protesters after the conflict ends. And note that wait is still the message that CENTCOM is sending to the Iranian people, so this is plausible. Then the United States will continue the bombing campaign until the intelligence community feels like it has attrited enough Iranian security forces for a revolution to succeed. Base denials from Europe only prolong that process. The point is that I am not here to tell you that Europe is making a mistake. Rather, I am here to say that the strategy is poorly defined, and it is hard for any of us to know whether it will work. Heck, remember that only 2 countries are denying base entry, while others are open to helping short of military assistance. So it is also unclear if Europe has a well-defined strategy. But if you want an outcome where the strait opens quickly, then you too should be asking for clarification on how exactly they think that the strategy will work. So, for your takeaway lines, some European countries are denying even passive support for US efforts in Iran. The goal here is to force the United States to terminate the war as fast as possible. But what dictates whether wars end is the resolution of bargaining frictions that caused it, and it is unclear how those countries link the strategy to that outcome. As it stands, it seems that we are caught in a time loop. Europe and Trump have a disagreement. Trump lashes out, causing transatlantic strain on everyone. P.S. Prepare for threats that the United States will withdraw its support from the Pearl Initiative for Ukraine, which gives European buyers access to the US weapons that Ukraine needs. Europe returns to the table with some type of concession. Here, a UK summit involving 35 parties to work on Hormuz issues. I, for one, look forward to hearing leaks about the intra-European debates from that meeting, as I suspect some do not think that this was the right time for Spain and France to pull the base card. Then we all forget about these things for a couple of months. I guess I will see you in June. Nah, who am I kidding? I'll be back tomorrow. Apologies for not doing the Q&A that I solicited questions for yesterday. Sometimes new things just pop up. I have saved the questions for when I can get to them, though. As for now, if you enjoyed today's video, then please like, share, and subscribe, and I will see you next time. Take care.